a deadline written in ink. The wind over the Dakota grasslands carries more than dust. It carries warnings. It carries old sorrows. It carries the sound of a clock that never stops ticking. In the autumn of 1884, that wind pressed hard against the windows of a small farmhouse outside Deadwood. It rattled the shutters. It hissed through the cracks in the doorframe like something trying to get in. Inside, a young woman named Charlotte Reed sat at a wooden table. A single letter lay in front of her. Her hands were trembling. Charlotte was 26 years old. She had her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's tired eyes. Both her parents were gone now. So was her older brother, lost 2 winters back to a fever that swept through the territory like a plague. The letter was from the county land office. She had read it 4 times already. Each time, the words stayed the same, black ink on cream paper, cold and final. The homestead deed required a male signature to renew. Her father was gone. Her brother was gone. The land would revert to the territory in 7 days unless she married before the deadline. Charlotte set the letter down. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the page, as though she might will the words into changing if she stared at them long enough. She looked out the window at the wheat fields stretching toward the horizon, golden endless under a gray autumn sky. Those fields had buried her father. They had raised her since she was a girl learning to walk between the furrows. She had planted every row this season with her own 2 hands. She would not let ink on a page take them from her. She rose from the table, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. She pulled on her coat, a worn brown thing with a tear at the collar that she had never found time to mend. She had 7 days. She intended to use every one of them. Outside, the wind picked up again, colder now, sharper, carrying the first bite of the coming winter. It smelled like frost and distant smoke from someone's chimney. Charlotte walked toward town, her boots crunching against the frozen path, her breath fogging in front of her like a ghost leading the way. She did not know it yet, but before the sun set, her plan would collide with a man who had no interest in being found, and no interest in being anyone's answer to a deadline. The man who didn't want to be seen. Deadwood was loud that afternoon. Wagons rattled over the packed dirt street, their wheels catching in ruts left by last week's rain. Miners shouted prices at the general store. A dog barked somewhere near the livery, chasing something only it could see. Charlotte moved through the crowd with purpose, though her heart was pounding harder than she cared to admit. She had a short list in her mind, names gathered from careful, quiet questions asked over the past 2 days. Men who were unmarried. Men who were decent, or decent enough. Men who might listen to a desperate proposal without laughing in her face. She found her first candidate at the livery stable, a young farmhand named Wilbur who had once tipped his hat to her at church. He laughed before she even finished her sentence, laughed until he had to lean against a stall post to catch his breath. "Marry you? For a deed," he wheezed. "Miss Reed, that's the funniest thing I've heard all season." Charlotte walked away with her cheeks burning. She found her second candidate at the church, a widower named Ezra who kept the accounts for the mercantile. He turned red and stammered an excuse about his mother needing him, about not being ready, about a dozen things that were really just one word dressed up in politeness. No. By the third refusal, from a blacksmith's apprentice who simply shook his head and walked away without a word, Charlotte's confidence had worn as thin as her coat. She stopped outside the saloon, catching her breath, one gloved hand pressed against the cold wooden post of the porch. The sun was already beginning its slow slide toward the western hills. She had wasted half a day, had nothing to show for it. That was when she saw him. A man sat alone at the edge of the porch, away from the noise and the drink and the laughter spilling out through the swinging doors behind him. He was mending a saddle strap with quiet, careful hands, his movements slow and deliberate, as though the rest of the world simply didn't concern him. He wore a plain gray coat, weathered at the elbows, and a hat pulled low enough to shadow most of his face. A rifle leaned against the post beside him, though he seemed more interested in leather and thread than in anything happening around him. He did not look up when she approached. "Excuse me," Charlotte said, gathering what remained of her courage. "Are you Thomas Bell?" The man's hands stopped moving, though he did not raise his head right away. "Depends who's asking," he said. His voice was low and rough. like gravel under a wagon wheel.
I have come
My
to
name
discuss
is
the terms of
Charlotte
our
Reed.
agreement,
I have a business
and I
proposal.
expect
He finally looked up. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and guarded, unreadable in a way that made her want to look away and study him closer, both at once. I don't do business with strangers, he said, returning his attention to the saddle strap. You will want to hear this one, Charlotte replied, refusing to be dismissed so easily. It concerns marriage. Thomas Bell's jaw tightened. He set the saddle strap down slowly, deliberately, as though buying himself time. Then you've got the wrong man, he said. I buried a wife 2 winters back. I'm not looking to replace her. Not now. Not ever. Charlotte felt her chest tighten with disappointment. The same disappointment she had swallowed 3 times already that day. But something about the way he said it, not cruel, just tired, made her stay rooted to the spot instead of walking away. I'm not asking you to replace anyone, she said quietly. I'm asking you to sign a paper. Nothing more than that. A proposal without romance. Thomas studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes moving over her face as though trying to determine whether she was foolish, desperate, or simply honest. The wind tugged at the brim of his hat, and somewhere down the street, a piano started up inside the saloon, tinny and out of tune. Explain, he said simply. Charlotte took a breath, steadying herself. She told him everything, the words spilling out faster than she intended. The deadline. The 7 days. The fields that had raised her since childhood. The ones that held her father's grave at the edge of the north pasture. I need a husband on paper only, she said, meeting his eyes despite the heat rising in her cheeks. You keep your name. I keep my land. We live as neighbors, not as man and wife, in every practical sense. In 1 year, once the deed is secure, we quietly separate. No scandal falls on either of us. I have a little money saved. I can pay you for your trouble. Thomas was silent for a long while. He looked past her, toward the mountains turning gold and violet in the afternoon light, as though the answer might be written somewhere out there among the peaks. Why me? He asked finally. You don't know me. Half this town doesn't know me, not really. Because you didn't laugh, Charlotte said. 3 other men laughed today, Mr. Bell. You didn't. And because the whole town says you keep your word, even when it costs you plenty. Something flickered behind his eyes, quick and gone before she could name it. Grief, maybe. Or recognition of something he hadn't expected to feel again. My wife died on our own land, he said quietly, his voice dropping lower still. A fever same as took half this territory that year. I understand what it means to lose ground that carries someone's memory pressed into every furrow. Charlotte held her breath, unsure whether she had wounded him or reached him. I'll think on it, Thomas said, rising from the porch step and gathering the saddle strap. Come back tomorrow morning. I'm not a man who decides things quickly. It was not a yes, but it was not a no either, and for the first time all day, Charlotte allowed herself a small, fragile hope. That night, Charlotte barely slept. She lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle against the farmhouse walls, counting the days she had left on her fingers as though the numbers might somehow multiply if she counted carefully enough. 6 days remained when she woke, the frost thick on a window pane, her breath visible even inside the house. An unlikely agreement. Thomas arrived at her farmhouse before sunrise, his horse's breath fogging in the cold morning air, the first pale light barely touching the eastern edge of the sky. Charlotte met him on the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl, her hands cupped around a tin mug of coffee she had made more for warmth than for drinking. I'll do it, he said, without dismounting, as though he needed the horse beneath him to keep from changing his mind. On one condition. Name it, Charlotte replied, setting the mug down on the porch rail. We tell the truth to no one but the preacher, Thomas said. As far as this town is concerned, we are simply married, plain and ordinary. I won't have people pitying either of us, or prying into business that's ours alone to carry. Charlotte nodded, relief flooding through her so suddenly her knees nearly buckled. Agreed. They rode into town together that same morning, Charlotte on her father's old mare, Thomas on his bay gelding, the two of them barely speaking along the way. The circuit preacher, a soft-spoken man named Reverend Hale, Marry them in a small wooden chapel with no flowers and no witnesses beyond the church mouse rustling in the corner and a single shaft of morning light falling through the dusty window. I do, Thomas said, his voice flat and businesslike, his eyes fixed somewhere over the Reverend's shoulder. I do, Charlotte echoed, her voice steadier than she expected, though her hands trembled where they were clasped in front of her. When they stepped outside, the town had already begun to notice. Whispers followed them down the street like shadows stretching long in the morning light. Thomas Bell married again? A shopkeeper murmured to his wife, not quite quietly enough. Didn't think he'd ever let another woman near that heart of his, not after Anna. Charlotte pretended not to hear. Thomas said nothing at all, his jaw set, his eyes forward, as though the words simply bounced off him like rain off a tin roof. That evening, Thomas moved a single trunk into the small guest room of Charlotte's farmhouse. It held little more than a spare shirt, a razor, and a folded photograph he did not show her. He did not ask for anything more than the room itself. The arrangement was simple, practical, safe, or so they both told themselves. Neither of them expected it to feel like anything else. Not yet. The weight of silence. The following weeks fell into a quiet rhythm, the kind that neither of them spoke of but both seemed to welcome. Thomas repaired the barn roof without being asked, climbing up before dawn with a hammer and a mouthful of nails. He mended fences that had sagged since Charlotte's father passed, working steadily through the cold afternoons until his hands were raw. He never entered rooms uninvited, never overstepped the quiet boundary they had drawn between them. Charlotte began leaving a plate for him at supper without needing to think about it, setting two places at the table as naturally as breathing. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and heavy, dark clouds, swallowing the last of the daylight in a matter of minutes. Thunder cracked over the fields, close enough to rattle the window panes. Charlotte stood at the window, watching lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. Thomas came in from the barn, soaked through, his hat dripping a steady trail of water onto the floorboards. Storm caught the north fence, he said, hanging his coat by the door. I secured what I could before it got too dark to see. Thank you, Charlotte said, handing him a dry towel.
Here,
She hesitated, watching him rub the rain from his hair, before adding, You didn't have to do that. Not for a paper marriage. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes catching the firelight. A man keeps his word, he said simply. Paper or not. That's not a thing I know how to do halfway. They sat by the fire that night, saying little, listening to the storm pass overhead, the thunder growing more distant with each passing minute. Charlotte found herself studying the lines on his face, the small scar above his eyebrow, wondering what sorrow had put them there and what joy, if any, had ever softened them. Tell me about her, Charlotte said softly, surprising herself with a question. Your wife. Thomas's hands tightened around his coffee cup, his knuckles going pale. Her name was Anna, he said after a long pause. She loved this kind of land more than I ever did. A fever took her one spring, quick as a candle going out in the wind. I still hear her laughter sometimes when the wind moves through the grass just right. Charlotte's throat tightened, an ache blooming behind her ribs that she hadn't expected. I'm sorry. So am I, Thomas said, staring into the fire. Sorry for a lot of things. Sorry I couldn't save her. Sorry I stopped believing anything good could find me after. The fire crackled between them, and for the first time, the silence in the room did not feel empty. It felt shared, warm in a way neither of them had words for yet. Threat from town. Word of the hurried marriage reached further than Charlotte expected, carried on the same gossip that had spread through Deadwood like wildfire since their wedding day. A land speculator named Jacob Reeves had been watching Charlotte's fields for months, hoping to buy them cheap once the deed lapsed, the way he had bought up half a dozen other homesteads from desperate widows and orphan sons across the county. Now that plan had failed, and Reeves was not a patient man, nor a kind one. He rode out to the farmhouse on a gray afternoon, flanked by two hired men with cold eyes and colder smiles,
This land
their
will be
horses
ours.
kicking up dust along the drive. Charlotte was in the garden, gathering the last of the season's squash, when she saw them approaching. A cold unease settled in her stomach, heavier than the basket in her arms. Thomas stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth, his expression calm but alert, his body angled slightly, ready. Reeves, Thomas said, his voice level. This is private land. You know that well enough. Just here to make an offer. Reeves said, smiling without warmth, his gloved hands resting easy on his saddle horn. A generous one, mind you. Enough to start fresh somewhere easier than this stretch of dirt. The land isn't for sale, Charlotte said firmly, setting the basket down and stepping forward to stand beside Thomas. Reeves's smile faded at the edges. It's a shame, marrying a man who's buried one wife already. Bad luck tends to follow some folks, Mrs. Bell. You do well to remember that. Thomas's hands curled into fists at his sides, though his voice stayed level, dangerously so. You've made your offer, Thomas said. Now you can leave, before I forget my manners. Reeves studied them both, calculating, his eyes flicking between Charlotte's set jaw and Thomas's steady stance. This isn't finished, he said finally. He turned his horse and rode off, his men trailing behind him, their laughter carrying back on the wind. Charlotte let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hands trembling at her sides. He won't stop, she said quietly. Men like that never do. My father warned me about him once years ago. Thomas placed a steady hand on her shoulder, warm even through the fabric of her sleeve. It was the first time he had touched her since their wedding day, and the touch lingered longer than either of them expected. Then we won't stop either, he said.
I promise you, I won't let them take this land.
What the fire revealed. 3 nights later, Charlotte woke to the smell of smoke, sharp and acrid, curling under her bedroom door. The old grain shed was burning, flames licking up into the night sky, casting an orange glow across the yard that turned the frost-covered ground the color of embers. Thomas was already outside, shouting for buckets, fighting the fire with his bare hands until his palms blistered and cracked. Charlotte ran to help, her nightgown catching on the fence as she scrambled past, filling buckets from the well, passing them down a chain of desperate hands. Neighbors arrived within the hour, drawn by the glow on the horizon, their wagons rattling up the drive in the darkness. By dawn, the shed was ash, a smoldering black scar against the pale morning sky, but the barn and the house still stood, saved by hours of desperate, exhausting work. Charlotte sat on the porch steps, exhausted, her hands raw and shaking, soot smeared across her cheek. Thomas sat beside her, his shirt streaked black, his blistered palms wrapped loosely in torn cloth. Reeves did this, Charlotte said, staring at the ruined shed. We can't prove it, Thomas replied, his voice hoarse from smoke. But we both know it plain as the sunrise. They sat in silence, watching smoke drift into the pale morning sky, the whole world quiet and gray around them. I could lose everything, Charlotte whispered, her voice breaking for the first time since the letter had arrived. Everything my father built with his own 2 hands. Thomas turned to face her. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open now, unshielded in a way she had never seen before. You won't lose it, he said. Not while I'm standing here. I swear it. Why do you care so much? Charlotte asked, searching his soot-streaked face. This was only ever supposed to be paper between us. A business arrangement, nothing more. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though he were choosing each word carefully. It stopped feeling like paper a while ago, he said finally.
I reckon I never
I don't
knew
rightly
how
know
much I needed you.
Somewhere between the
till now.
barn roof and the storm, maybe. Somewhere I wasn't paying close enough attention. Charlotte's heart pounded against her ribs, loud enough she was certain he could hear it. She searched his face for any sign of hesitation and found none, only a quiet, aching honesty. For me too, she admitted softly. Neither of them moved closer. Neither of them moved away. They simply sat together in the ash and the silence, something unspoken settling gently between them. An offer to leave. 2 days later, Reeves returned, this time with a folded document tucked beneath his arm and a colder smile than before. The Territory Office will be reviewing land disputes next month, he said, standing at the edge of the porch as though he owned it already. Fires. Accidents. Bad luck has a way of following certain deeds, Mrs. Bell. I'd hate for yours to be questioned so closely. He was threatening to challenge the marriage itself, to claim it was a sham arranged only to dodge the deadline, a hollow contract signed in desperation rather than in truth. That evening, Thomas sat across from Charlotte at the table, his expression heavy, the lamp between them casting long shadows across the worn wood. If he takes this to the Territory Office, they may investigate us, Thomas said. They may ask questions neither of us can answer honestly, not without admitting how this began. What are you saying? Charlotte asked, though some part of her already feared the answer. I'm saying maybe I should go, Thomas said quietly, not meeting her eyes. Maybe if I leave, there's no marriage left to question. No target for Reeves to aim at. You could find another way to keep the land, some way that doesn't put you at risk on my account. Charlotte felt something crack inside her chest, sharp and sudden. Is that what you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas looked down at his hands, the ones that had rebuilt her fences, fought her fires, defended her home against men who wished her nothing but ruin. No, he said, but I won't be the reason you lose everything you love. I've already lost enough people I love to know I can't watch that happen again. And if I told you, Charlotte said, her voice trembling, that you become one of those things? One of the things I love. Thomas looked up startled, the lamplight flickering across his face. The wind outside rattled softly against the windows, as if the whole prairie was holding its breath, waiting to hear what he would say next. The truth beneath the contract. I didn't marry you for the land, Charlotte said, the words spilling out before she could stop them, before pride or fear could hold them back any longer. Not anymore. I don't know exactly when that changed. Maybe it was the barn roof. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was tonight, watching you sit there ready to walk away to protect me. Thomas stood slowly, crossing the small distance between them, his blistered hand reaching for hers. Charlotte, he said, her name unfamiliar and tender on his tongue, spoken with a softness she had never heard from him before. Bury my heart with Anna. I never thought I'd feel anything again, not for anyone. And now, she asked, her breath catching. Now I find myself thinking of you before I think of anything else, he admitted. Before the fences, before the fields, before Reeves and his threats. I think that frightens me more than any of it. Charlotte reached out and took his blistered hand fully in hers, careful of the raw skin beneath the cloth wrapping. Then let's not run from it, she said. Let's face Reeves together. As what we've actually become, not as what we pretended to be that first morning. Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded, something like hope breaking through the guarded storm that had lived behind his eyes for 2 long winters. Together, he agreed, his voice steady for the first time since the fire. A stand at the land office. The next morning, they rode into town together, side by side, no longer strangers bound by paper and desperation, but something neither of them had names for yet, something that felt suspiciously, wonderfully like the truth. At the land office, Reeves was already waiting, his document in hand, ready to challenge the marriage's legitimacy in front of the county clerk and anyone else who cared to gather and watch. This union was formed only to dodge a deadline, Reeves declared loudly to the clerk, drawing a small crowd from the street outside. It's a sham, and everyone here knows it plain as day. Thomas stepped forward before Charlotte could speak, his voice carrying clear across the room. It began as an arrangement, he said honestly, refusing to hide from the truth of it. I won't deny that, not to you, not to anyone. But it is not a sham, not anymore. Ask anyone who saw me fight a fire on that land with my own 2 hands. Ask anyone who has seen the way I look at my wife when she isn't watching. Charlotte took his hand in front of the clerk, in front of Reeves, in front of the whole watching town crowded at the doorway. We are married, she said clearly, her voice steady and unashamed. In every way that matters, Mr. Reeves, whatever way it may have started. The clerk studied the deed, studied the couple standing before him, hands clasped, and finally set his pen down with a decisive click. The deed stands, he said. There's nothing here to challenge, Mr. Reeves. I'd suggest you find another piece of land to covet. Reeves's jaw tightened with fury, his knuckles white around a useless document, but there was nothing left for him to say. He turned and walked out without another word, his scheme unraveling behind him like thread pulled from a torn coat. A wedding worth remembering. That spring, Thomas and Charlotte held a second wedding, this time with wildflowers gathered from the very field she had fought so hard to keep, woven into a simple bouquet by Charlotte's own hands. The whole town came, the same neighbors who had once only whispered now smiling freely, wishing them well, bringing pies and quilts and small gifts wrapped in brown paper. Reverend Hale, who had married them the first time as a formality, now did so with real warmth in his voice, his eyes bright as he looked between them. Some marriages begin with love, he said to the gathered crowd, and some marriages find their way there slower, through fire and storm and quiet Tuesday afternoons. Either path, when walked honestly, can lead to the very same destination. Thomas looked at Charlotte, standing there in a simple blue dress with wildflowers in her hair, and for the first time since Anna's passing, his eyes held nothing but light. I do, he said, his voice full and certain, nothing flat or businesslike left in it at all. I do, Charlotte echoed, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. Happy tears this time, the kind she had never expected to cry again after her father's funeral. What the land remembers. Years passed. The farmhouse that once nearly slipped from Charlotte's hands became one of the most respected homesteads in the county, its fields golden and full every autumn, its barns sturdy against every storm that rolled through. They raised 2 children beneath those wheat fields, a boy with his father's storm-gray eyes and a girl with her mother's stubborn jaw, teaching them both the same fierce, patient love for the land that had once saved their parents' lives. Every autumn, when the wind rolled in cold and sharp across the grasslands, Thomas would take Charlotte's hand on the porch and remind her of the 7 days that changed everything: the letter, the deadline, the stranger mending a saddle strap who wanted no part of marriage. 7 days to find a husband, he would say, smiling in the way he only smiled for her. I like to think I found something greater instead. As we close this story of the Dakota Plains, let it remind us of a simple truth. Sometimes the arrangements we make out of desperation become the very foundations upon which real love is built. One repaired fence, one shared fire, one honest word at a time. If you believe a promise made out of necessity can grow into something true, then you already understand the story of Charlotte and Thomas. Until the next trail, may you find the strength to hold on to what matters most and the courage to let love find you, even when you least expect it, even when it arrives wearing a stranger's face. Before you go, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I'd love to know how far this story traveled. If Charlotte and Thomas's journey touched your heart, let me know with a comment, and I'll see you on the next trail. Thanks for watching.